I think that things are changing under Trump, but I'm not certain, of course. It just appears that way. But basically, this, if I could put it in just a few words, the symptom of imperial of oligarchic power is misery at home, mayhem abroad. So this was true for the British Empire, Spanish, French, Dutch, Venetian, and the Roman Empire as well. Rome was, we see things that still stand, which means these very majestic buildings built out of stone and concrete. But Rome itself, even when it was in the zenith of its power, was surrounded by slums, and majority of the population of Rome were living in those slums.
Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today we've got a brand new guest, Alex Krainer. Alex is a market geopolitical analyst. He's an author and a former hedge fund manager, and many of you have asked me to have him on. So here he is. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Mario. Thank you for the invite. Great to be with you, and warm greetings to all your viewers and listeners.
Thank you. So let's start with an idea that I thought was really interesting, that what's going on in the world right now, especially vis-a-vis Israel and Iran. And I know that in the fog of war, it's always difficult to know exactly what's going on. There's the old saying about the truth being the first victim of war. But you made some interesting points in one of your recent interviews that what could be happening is a deception to bring down the empire. So maybe you could talk about that and what empire that is, because most people think it's the American empire, but you don't.
Well, so let's focus on this one first. We, you know, the school curriculum that we get through our schooling in the typical Western society, we tend to equate nations with empires. So we had Spanish Empire and French Empire and the Dutch Empire and the Venetian and Ottoman and the British Empire and now the American Empire. But it seems to me that in reality, nations are merely hosts to imperial interests, which, to my mind, is almost invariably um, a money-lending oligarchy. And this principle seems to hold true all the way from today to the times of Greek antiquity. So it's 2,500 years, and the once they take power, the symptoms of social decay, colonialism, imperialism, repression at home, and general misery of the people living in the host nation seems to hold true throughout, almost without exception. And I say almost only because I'm not aware of any exceptions. So it may be completely without exception. And we see that even today with what we would call the American Empire. The American Empire is maybe more extensive than the British Empire before it. Military bases in 175 or 176 countries, pretty much controlling most of the world. And if you look at the American cities, it's a horror show basically. And increasingly, the American people have difficulty making ends meet. They maintain their lifestyle on credit cards at levels of debts that are unpayable, while the government is pursuing imperial expansion. I think that things are changing under Trump, but I'm not certain, of course. It just appears that way. But basically, this, if I could put it in just a few words, the symptom of imperial of oligarchic power is misery at home, mayhem abroad. So this was true for the British Empire, Spanish, French, Dutch, Venetian, and the Roman Empire as well. Rome was, we see things that still stand, which means these very majestic buildings built out of stone and concrete. But Rome itself, even when it was in the zenith of its power, was surrounded by slums, and majority of the population of Rome were living in those slums. So that's so far as the empire goes. Now, Trump, it seems to me, for a variety of reasons, there's a lot of them, that he wants to break with this. And now, the most recent events in the Middle East uh, seem to suggest that Trump has been co-opted into the, globalist forces, and that he's carrying water for them, for Israel. But I'm not sure that this is correct. It seems to me that he's actually done a massive disservice to the empire, because Israel, uh, since its conception, since before its birth in 1948, has been a colonial project of the British Empire. It remains so even under what you could call the American Empire. Its sole objective was to enable Western colonial powers to maintain their hegemony in the Middle East. It's a very important area of the world, not only because it's resource rich, but also because it has always been kind of the ultimate crossroads for trade between the East and West. So controlling the East Mediterranean um, has always been a very, very, very high priority for empires, going back to Rome as well. For Rome, controlling this stretch from Asia Minor to Egypt has been one of the biggest priorities, and it was by far the largest source of income to the Roman treasury. So we see the same playing out today, but the reasons why I doubt Trump's sincerity in what appears to be um, extraordinary effort to defend Israel from Iran is two things, basically, two general categories of thought. One is that everything the United States seems to be doing in the Middle East seems way over the top, idiotic, and stupid. Uh, there's they're running extraordinarily high risks of not only triggering World War III, which could end up in a nuclear exchange, but also completely being ejected from the region, completely losing any influence in the region. Because if they go to war against Iran, they can only score a defeat from that. There's no way that they can defeat Iran. And even the Operation Rough Rider that they launched on 15th March this year, when they started bombing Yemen, this wasn't an original idea. Yemen has been at the receiving end of Western bombing campaigns since 2014, so it's been more than 10 years. It didn't do anything. Then they launched in December 2023 Operation Prosperity Guardian, where the United States and Britain and Israel and other Western countries were launching these large-scale bombing campaigns against Yemen, again to no avail, to no effect. So, you know, it seems beyond idiotic for Trump administration to suddenly say, "Oh, we're gonna bomb Yemen now. That's gonna do it. That's gonna, change the equation in the region." Obviously not. So another line of reasoning of why I uh, doubt Trump's sincerity with regards to Israel is that it is practically diagonally opposed to his positions that he has stated repeatedly for years now, practically since before his first term in 2016, even in the during the election campaigns. So he has been categorically opposed to the United States remaining in the position of being the military enforcement arm of the empire. And he wanted to roll back the empire. He wanted to bring US troops home. He wanted to bring them back from Afghanistan and from Syria and from Europe as well. And so he's never been an enthusiast of United States being an empire. He's always wanted to roll that back. He will always wanted to bring U.S. troops home. He wanted to focus on rebuilding the American industrial base and loosening American alliances with European powers. So what he has done over the last few weeks with regards to Yemen and Iraq has been exactly opposite of that. He's been defending Israel, which is basically British imperial project. That doesn't seem to make sense unless he has been somehow gotten to, maybe, somebody said, look, you oppose us, we're gonna have your whole family killed, or something to that effect. I don't know. The same networks of power have assassinated many political leaders, including U.S. presidents. So I doubt that, political assassinations are across, beyond the red line for them. Alternatively, Trump may have simply lost focus. He just turned 79. Maybe he's not as sharp as he used to be. But, maybe he's played a trick on them all. If you can't stand in the way of a stampeding crowd, then maybe you can put yourself at the head of that stampede and misdirect them. And it seems to me that that's what happened because, yes, they launched an attack on Iran, but they didn't destroy Iran's nuclear program. And more importantly, because the attack was never about the nuclear program, they didn't regime change Iran, and they're not talking about regime changing Iran. So Iranian regime remained intact. They invited a token, well, they didn't invite it, but they accepted a token reprisal that, made another few golf holes in their base in Qatar. And they each declared victory and went to their own respective corners. And now we have talk about negotiations again and the desire to cut deals with Iran and Russia and China, and talk, as JD Vance said on Monday, of a new era of peace and prosperity in the Middle East. So that's not the empire signaling. That's a different talk altogether. It's hard to know at this point which part is sincere and which part isn't sincere. But I would challenge the idea that Trump is completely and sincerely devoted and subservient to Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu. Let's remember, Benjamin Netanyahu was the first statesman to call Joe Biden to congratulate him on winning the 2020 elections. I think it was about 3 hours before the final results of elections were even announced. So I very much doubt that Trump is the type that says, "Hey, no big deal, water under the bridge. You're my best friend. Do anything for you. I'll destroy my country for you." So I question that, and then if you do question that, then there's more ways to interpret what's going on today.
Before we continue with today's interview, I'd like to say a few words about our sponsor, Incogni. So let's imagine you were on a busy street, and then imagine a person going past you. Maybe there's a picture forming in your head, And I bet if I asked all of you what kind of person you saw, you'd all give me different answers. There's one thing we'd all agree on, though. We would not give our personal information to a stranger, whether that's our phone numbers, email addresses, or even medical records. Unfortunately, though, it's happening all the time on the internet, often without your knowledge. Every time you type personal information online, that information can end up in the hands of data brokers. Yes, there is such thing as data brokers, and be put on people's search websites that anyone can get access to. Researchers found out that 11 out of 26 cybercrime categories are enabled when criminals have access to the information that data brokers deal with. This includes investment scams, which accounted for the loss of $1.83 billion in 2024 alone. So with Incognito, you can keep your information as private on the internet as you would on the street. So to get started with Incognito, just create an account and give them permission to work with you. Incognito scans data broker databases for your personal information and sends out removal requests. Progress reports will keep you informed about your requests, their progress, and how many have been completed. Incognito automatically rescans and keeps adding new data brokers and people search sites to their list. At Moneko64, I'm giving you the key to the safe. Enter the code Moneko64 at the link below to get 60% off an annual plan and secure your privacy today. And you just said Trump, let's say theoretically, or would talk to Netanyahu and say, I won't destroy my country for Israel or for you. But you also spoken recently about the fact that America is being used by London, Paris, and Wall Street banking interests. And they've been used for, well, I would say since the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, and maybe even before that, because a lot of people don't know the Morgan interest, JP Morgan interest, they grew out of the city of London. So actually
Correct.
JP Morgan is a London bank originally. And as you say, America, the founding fathers, especially George Washington, he warned about entanglements and foreign alliances, that America should have good commercial like relations with other nations, but not interfere. So I think, like you, that America has been hijacked by like foreign policy interests, let's say in London and Paris. And why? Well, I think it's because of this Mackinder theory of who controls Eurasia or the world island controls the world. And I think Trump, like you said, and this is not for certain, he wants to get away from that, because America could do very well just being on its own. Of course, cooperating with like other countries like China and Russia. But the biggest losers, of course, would be London, Paris, and the Wall Street interests, I guess. They are in America, but they don't really have any allegiance to really the United States. Is that what you mean?
Yes, I do mean that. And what I would add to what you said, I entirely agree. Also, history is not kind to empires, because every single one ultimately collapses, because the costs of maintaining empires are usually much, much higher to the society of the host nations than the benefit that accrues typically to the banking oligarchies. Um, I think that, okay, if we focused on banking, it's important to point out that banking is not inherently and inevitably evil. Banking can work within uh, a legal framework that makes it a very useful industry in an economy. It can, it allocates capital to development. It can serve as a public utility, in fact. And this is the dynamic which has enabled Germany to become the leading global exporting superpower up until maybe 10, 12 years ago. It was the number one exporting country in the world. And it was able to achieve that result because it had a superb, very diverse, very extensive banking industry, which consisted of thousands of small, local, and regional banks that supported small and medium-sized um, enterprise in their regions. And 70% of all those banks were non-profit institutions. So they enabled Germany to become a competitive force in the world markets to everybody's benefit, making Germany a prosperous place and a dynamic economy, one of the most competitive in the world. So, good for everyone. Whereas, I think that stemming from the City of London, in some way, the choice has been made to pursue a very pathogenic predatory model of banking, which, regards everywhere around the world as a as the target of colonial plunder, and any population around the world as ultimately a slave workforce, because the resources of other countries, that they're not going to extract themselves and load themselves on ships or run by Western trading companies. Somebody has to do that, so you do need local populations, but you generally need them to be dirt poor, and you need them to be desperate in order to work for you for pennies. And so I think that United States, being also a very resourceful, dynamic, entrepreneurial culture, and a developed economy, they have choices and they have a lot of maneuvering space. And I think that it would be relatively easy for an American government to prepare the even competitive space for local and regional banking, and to create a legal framework where these large, too big to fail banks uh, have to cease and desist the predatory practices around the world. That can be done. Uh, and so I think that this is a possibility in the United States, whereas I don't see it as a possibility so much in Europe, because uh, European democracies have been eviscerated for all practical purposes. We live under oligarchies. These oligarchies are very much money lending oligarchies. They run our societies. It's no wonder that, in Germany, the chancellor is a BlackRock man, that in France, the president is a Rothschild banker, uh, and so on and so forth. And so I think that we're too far gone, and I think that in Europe, it's a civil war. Civil wars are more likely scenarios than uh, a reform of the system through the institutions of the system.
How do you stand on the topic of like sound money? Because I personally think you can't have like a sound banking system that acts as a utility without sound money. And yes, in the U.S., they had no central bank, I guess, from 1836 to 1913. Unfortunately, they got legal tender laws brought in 1862, I think, because of the Civil War. And the reason I say that is because if you don't have legal tender laws and you don't have a central bank, I think that's a good recipe for free banking and like a good thing, but we see that Trump he does criticize the Fed, but not in a way that he criticizes the institution, but the guy who's leading it. But and then you look at Thomas Massey, who has been like heavily criticized by Trump, but I would say has a huge support in the MAGA camp. He's very much pro abolishing the Federal Reserve and bringing back sound money. So, do you think that would be something that we should keep an eye on, or you don't think there's any possibility that Trump would think about that?
Well, I think that Trump is thinking about that because, he did bring Scott Bessent on his team. And I think that Stephen Miran is also one of the advisors to the Trump administration. And these are people who have thought much about reforming the monetary system and introducing some form of a sound money system. And then, I think it's significant that Trump has also issued his private cryptocurrency, which, it had to come out of somewhere. He didn't wake up one day and decide, I'm really bored today. I think I'm going to launch a private cryptocurrency. It must have been on the back of some discussions and thinking. And obviously, the need for reform is recognized. So, there's hope, but this is a complex issue. And I think that bringing back sound money is only a part of the solution. It's maybe the foundation, but it will still not be complete without a legal reform, and I think even a spiritual and cultural reform, because, let's face it, Greek antiquity, Roman Empire, the Lombard bankers, the Venetian bankers, the Dutch bankers, they all ran ultimately sound money systems because, gold and silver were money, and you still had the same symptoms of social dysfunction in those empires as you do today. And the reason was because basically the oligarchic abuse was unchecked. And so if you can't check and limit oligarchic abuse, whether you're using sound money or not, you basically get the same result. And I think an extremely important case in this sense to recall in history is the Russian transition first from communism to capitalism during the 1990s, and then a transition from an oligarchic rule to an authoritarian rule. Because during the 1990s in Russia, you had the rule of oligarchs. It was called Sembankirshchina, the rule of seven bankers. And Russia was eviscerated during those 9 years from 1991 until 2000. She lost, I think, 50% of the GDP. The GDP drop was worse than during World War II, during German invasion. The life expectancy fell to something like 57 years. The average pay in Russia was $56 per month. 40% of Russian population was underneath the poverty line, and the whole country was basically disintegrating. It was in an advanced stage of completely falling apart. It was a failed state, one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Then came Vladimir Putin, and very soon into his presidential term, what he did was he basically invited all the major oligarchs to a meeting at the Kremlin, and he laid down the law. He said, "Okay, there will be no nationalization of your assets. So what you stole, you keep. Your obligation is to run your businesses, treat your employees correctly. Don't use them as a disposable workforce. Pay your taxes correctly, and most importantly, stay out of politics. And this was very, very difficult for the oligarchs because basically until that time, they were running the country. And so a few of them tried to challenge Putin. Then you had long months of legal battles that the oligarchs lost, which pretty much proved that Putin's legal backing and political backing was at that point much stronger than theirs. And these, I think, two or three oligarchs, when they lost, they ended up emigrating to Israel. And the third one who challenged him was the biggest, the wealthiest one of all, who was Mikhail Khodorkovsky. And Khodorkovsky was the trustee for Jacob Rothschild's interests in Russia. And uh, he ended up actually in prison for 9 years. He was busted on tax evasion charges, but all the same, he ended up in prison. And so this was finally an unmistakable signals to the rest of the oligarchs. Do your business, enjoy your life, and just leave politics to the people who are accountable to the nation and to its people. And so from that point on, with the oligarchs disenfranchised and put into their sandbox, Russia just took off like a rocket. First gradually, but now we see that the standard of livings have improved immeasurably. Russia is now a very respectable economy, number four in purchasing power parity terms in the world. It's become again a superpower in terms of military might. And the Russian people are highly appreciative of all this. And as a result, Vladimir Putin has his approval ratings in high 80s. And I think that over his whole term, it has averaged something like a 76 or 78% approval rating, which is what Western leaders cannot even dream about this. And I think that the key transition point was basically to take this money lending oligarchies, so the seven bankers that were running Russia until that time, and to basically set their limits. And I think that any parent who raised children will understand this because you know how it is to be with small children if you don't set limits on them. You have chaos in the home. You set limits on them and they're wonderful. And I think that maybe the same principle applies to money lending oligarchs.
Yeah, that's very interesting because you would have thought, well, he just crushed them and destroyed them, but no, he let them continue, but he gave them limits. And you mentioned that Trump has issued cryptocurrencies. I just want to add, he's also been issuing silver and gold coins. But I take your point about sound money that it does work well, but ultimately there has to be a spiritual awakening in society, and I think one of them is the fact that most people believe that they're owed something by the state. I don't know if you've heard of Frederick Bastiat, the French economist philosopher. He said that the state is the great fiction by which everyone wants to live at the expense of everyone else. I think that needs to change for things to get better. Because if it stays like this, the oligarchs can always capture the politicians. But my question now is, in terms of what's going on, is whether you think we're in for some big changes monetarily, financially, and economically around the world. And what you mentioned there about Putin, what he did with Russia, maybe it could be ironically, it could be a blueprint for what Trump does. Trump seems to be the kind of character that would dictate to businesses.
In fact, this is largely going under the radar, but we did have, I think it was last weekend or 10 days ago, a an attempted no kings protest across the United States. And I think a year or two ago. I forget exactly, but and I think people can look this up. Somebody was trying to pass a No Kings Act through US Congress, which is a very strange thing for the United States, the world's leading democracy, beacon of the free world and all this, that there are people in the bowels of the system that are obsessed with kings. And this obsession with kingship goes back to the Roman Empire, where once they eliminated the last king in 509 BC, the establishment was hypersensitive to anyone seeking kingship. And if you ever got accused of seeking kingship, you and your supporters would basically get visits from death squads, and many of these would-be reformers like Catiline, like the Gracchi brothers, like Julius Caesar, were slaughtered, in Julius Caesar's case by the senators themselves, but usually the Senate would send out death squads, and then they would slaughter thousands of people who were supporter of a king. So, the fact that this no kings obsession now suddenly is cropping up in the United States is very interesting. And then, in addition, I didn't come across this myself, but a good friend of mine who's very well informed told me that he watched an interview with Peter Thiel, of all people. And in this interview, Peter Thiel was talking about the fact that, well, in fact, his opinion that what the United States actually needs is actually a king, and that Trump could be that person. And so I think that's all very interesting because, yeah, absolutely, you need somebody with enough authority in society who could do like Vladimir Putin and line up the oligarchs and tell them from today on, I run the country. The people elected me. I'm accountable to them, and you have to work within these legal limits, which is unthinkable for any Western democracy. You don't see your oligarchs. You don't know exactly who they are, and you understand. I mean, everybody appreciates that. It's just not even a possibility for the U.S. president to speak in this manner to, let's say, Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, and even they are one or two notches below the actual ruling oligarchy. So let alone speaking like that to a scion of the Rockefeller family or others. So yeah, I think that to a certain extent, an authoritarian government is necessary, and in the Western culture, we've been largely brainwashed to think that democracy is just so wonderful you can't even question it. You're not allowed to question it, and the moment somebody even pronounces the word democracy, that's always something so wonderful and so beyond reproach and questioning that if anybody mentions kings, authoritarian rule, that's off limits and completely alien to our culture. But democracies also have a very impressive track record for being perpetrators of war around the world. Not because people democratically choose this, but because behind the smokescreen of supposed democracy, you always have the rule of oligarchies. And so, as an empirical fact, between 1946, so after World War II, and today, the United States has initiated more than 80% of all uh, international wars around the world. This is not because the American people want it, because every year they vote for anti-war candidates, but they always get more war somehow. So it is high time that we question democracy, uh, not not democracy as a concept, but the reality of it, because what we have are basically fake democracy, skin deep. It's a facade of democracy where you choose your prime minister or your president or your parliamentary representatives, but the actual power is elsewhere. And then just to wrap up this rant, last year we had Liz Truss visit Steve Bannon in the war room, and she gave us a stonker of a revelation when she said that when she was the prime minister, she came to number 10 Downing Street thinking that, now she's in charge and now she's going to be implementing all these ideas and policies that she had in mind. And she said, when I got there, I realized I don't have the levers of power, that the levers of power are in the hands of the Bank of England. So that tells you again that you're dealing always with the money lending oligarchies. And that's why the democracy as we have it today is a fake one.
Yeah, I totally agree. Even the United States was created to be a republic, which put checks and balances on democracy. But could we go into what you see going forward in terms of because I always like to look at the currencies because currencies are always the most important. It's the common denominator for everything, and especially the dollar. So how do you see the dollar going forward, and the challenge, let's say, from the BRICS?
I think, it's very, very difficult to predict these things. I think that long term, everybody understand that dollar has no future. And so we're gonna get rising de-dollarization around the world, and we're gonna get a steady erosion of dollars purchasing power. But dollars purchasing power against what? Um, Against real things, against commodities, gold and energy and agricultural commodities and so forth. Not necessarily in terms of other currencies, because I think that essentially the dollar is the same type of currency as is the British pound and the euro and the yen and so on. And I think that the euro and the pound and the yen and many other currencies of other countries in the world are probably in the worst shape. So we might see over the next 2 or 3 years dollar actually gaining strength against pound and euro and yen. Canadian dollar. Well, we don't know. Canadian dollar is a commodity currency, and Canada is still a big exporter of energy, so it might work in favor of the Canadian dollar. Same thing for Mexican peso. Same thing for Australian dollar. We don't know. It's difficult to predict these things, but I think the long-term future is bleak. But I think that it's less bleak for the dollar than it is for many other global, what they call hard currencies. I think probably yen is the first to go, followed by euro and then pound. And the dollar, they'll have maneuvering space, and especially if, Trump is successful in his intent to annex Canada and Greenland, that might give a very considerable new lease of life to the US dollar.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that, annexing Canada and Greenland. I
It's
forgot.
easy. Yeah, it's easy to forget with everything going on.
Yeah, I've forgotten about the tariffs as well.
Yes.
But before we wrap up, Alex, I wanted to recommend to the viewers, and maybe you've read this book. I like to recommend books, and it's going to be very pertinent to what you said about the money changers, the City of London, Paris, and Wall Street. And it's this one here. I don't know if you've seen it, The Empire of the
Oh,
City by E.C. Knut. And so it's the secret history of British financial power. And the author, he was a young man who went to fight in World War One. He was American, so 1917. And he basically bought into the spiel that we're going to war to save the world for democracy. That old
yes.
yeah, that old propaganda trick. And then when he came back, he started looking into it, and he wrote this book, and highly recommend it anyway. And
No,
yeah,
Mario, sorry. The author is Knut,
UTH.
Knuth.
Yeah, EC Knut. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's highly appreciated. It If I saw that on a bookshelf, absolutely, I would buy that book.
Yeah, I thought you'd like it. And the viewers, I've recommended it many times, but they're just
Have you come across the book The Great Red Dragon?
no,
Okay, so you might want to look that up. I think you can find it on the internet, the PDF, but it was written by an American author. The name escapes me right now, but it was written in, I think it was published in 1908 or 1898, something like this, at close to the turn of the century. And it was also talking about the influence of the British finance in the United States. Extremely interesting.
great. I'm going to look that up. And so, Alex, it was great speaking with you. Hopefully, we'll keep in touch and do this again.
With great pleasure, Mario. Thank you for having me. Once more, warm greetings to everyone out there. And until the next time,
Okay.
my son.